Oh, you did. Okay, perfect. Okay, thank you everyone for joining us today. My name is Mary Jo Katris and I am with University of Minnesota Extension in the Department of Family Health and Wellbeing. And we are so excited to be able to offer Taxes 101 again this year. As I reflect on the number of years that we have provided this webinar, I think it's at least 20 plus years that we have done this webinar in wanting to support taxes and tax preparation for the upcoming year with our community partners. So we appreciate you joining. And I know that some of you are repeat attendees and we appreciate that. So a couple housekeeping items before we get started. If you can make sure that you're on mute, we appreciate that. We asked if all of you could put your name, organization, and location in the chat so we know where you're coming from and who's in the room, so to speak. We will be recording this and sending this recording and the slides out to everyone, that's all of you, as well as those that have registered for the webinar. Please put questions in the chat along the way. Young and I will be monitoring the chat throughout the presentation and then taking questions at the end. So again, my name is Mary Jo Katris and I'm with University of Minnesota Extension. I am joined today by my colleagues, Aisha Sarvati, who is Assistant Supervising Attorney with Mid-Minnesota Legal Aid, and Young Mao, who is Assistant Professor, Educator in our Family Resiliency Program area, University of Minnesota Extension. We are also, this webinar is also supported and by our partners from Prepare and Prosper as well. And so without further ado, I am going to pass it over to Aisha to begin the webinar. And if anyone needs anything, any technical things, please put those questions in the chat as well. So thank you for joining us, Aisha.
Perfect. Thank you, Mary Jo. My name is Aisha Sarvati. A little look at the webinar agenda that we have today. I'll be giving an IRS update, then talking about some tax basics, defining terms throughout, talking about filing status, withholding, estimated payments, ITINs to give just an overview of that. Then I'll be talking about some federal tax credits, then post-tax return filing considerations, and ending with some resources for everyone for both federal and state. So the focus of this presentation is on the federal tax returns. Next Thursday, we'll actually be talking about Minnesota state-based credits and information about returns. So this focus of this one is on federal returns. And so talking about an IRS update, the IRS is part of the Inflation Reduction Act, improved telephone support with hiring of thousands of new employees. They just done another batch of nearly 4,000 new employees for this tax filing season for answering taxpayer calls specifically as well. And so the majority of them are being added to the main IRS line, which I have listed on there. Practitioners can also use the practitioner priority service line, which is 866-860-4259. That's a really helpful phone number to call. If you have general questions, if you want to talk about a specific taxpayer's issue and you have a power of attorney signed with the IRS, you can do that and call that line. Another new feature that they've had for tax professionals and service providers, and then in certain instances for taxpayers themselves, is a chat feature on irs.gov. So you can actually exchange information with a bot generally and have some general questions answered if you have them. It can be a helpful way to utilize irs.gov. There's a lot of online resources. The IRS has really expanded what it offers online. knowing that call wait times can be long and challenging. So it's just another resource available for people. If a taxpayer needs to see the IRS in person, they're called taxpayer assistance centers. They're available by appointment. I have the phone number listed to call there. And then during this tax filing season, there's 5 of them located in Minnesota, and they're offering extended hours Tuesdays and Thursday mornings from 7:30 to 8:30 a.m. during tax filing season. So generally they're open 8:30 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. So they've extended that an extra hour on certain days during tax filing season to try to get more appointments available for people. Another big update that I'll be talking about is letter 38. And so as part of that, there's 2 parts that go into that. And so the first part is that during the pandemic, the IRS stopped sending a lot of collection notices. They're resuming sending out those notices now, and they're doing that January through April, and they're sending them out in batches. And then if a taxpayer owes for a certain tax year, they'll receive a letter for each tax year that they owe for. And as part of that, the IRS did remove certain penalties for failure to pay during 2020 and 2021. Just for those years, and the IRS automatically granted the penalty relief for those years already. So if a taxpayer did owe during those years, they should see for certain penalties them to be removed so that they don't have to pay those. And then with letter 38, I'll show kind of an example here. On the right-hand corner, it'll have the notice name and date. It'll have the taxpayer's information. And then it's just a reminder you have a balance due. The IRS has options to help you. And then it actually is quite informative, and it lists out the options that taxpayers have for resolving their debt that they have. So whether or not they can make a payment, if they can make arrangements for payments, if they want to get temporary collection suspension, or if someone wants to do something like an offer and compromise. So all kind of specific tax information that's really helpful for taxpayers to have, and is actually included in this letter notice. So some important dates to be aware of. Filing season has begun. It started January 29th. If a taxpayer filed for EITC or additional child tax credit refund, those won't start until about February 27th. There might be some direct deposits that are received right before then, but around February 27th is when those will become available. The IRS does that as a way to try to decrease tax fraud around those credits. And so it's actually in the statute that they can't issue those before about mid to end February. Tax day is April 15th this year. And then estimated tax payments, and I'll talk a little bit about those, are due the 15th of April, June, August, September, and then for January for the following year. And so when is someone actually required to file a tax return? So when someone earns income in the US, then they have a tax filing obligation in general. If their gross income is above a certain threshold, then they have to file. And so I've listed out a chart here. And again, you'll have the PowerPoint afterwards and you can reflect back on it. But it depends on your filing status and your age. And then, so for example, if you're single under 65, it's 13,850. And this is in general. There are special rules for those who receive Social Security income. It's actually a different amount. It's 25,000 for single, 32,000 for married filing jointly, for a total of your income there. But not just those who have to file because maybe they meet that threshold, but there are other reasons a person should file. So if they have income tax withheld from their pay, they should file to receive that back from their withholdings. If they qualify for certain credits that I'll be talking about, it's really important that they file a tax return because that's the only way to take advantage of those credits. And then something else I want to know is if an individual qualified for an economic impact payment, the stimulus payments from 2020 and 2021, they need to file a tax return if they didn't receive those, and they need to claim the recovery rebate credit. And in general, you have 3 years to file to receive a tax refund. And so 2020 deadline is this year. For tax year 2020, you have to apply, and there are certain deadlines depending on when, if you haven't filed before, if you did file and you need to amend because perhaps you didn't claim the recovery rebate credit. So it's this tax filing season that an individual needs to apply to receive those. So it's important that if they haven't done so already, that they do so this filing season. So now I'll be talking about some different terms throughout. And so taxable income is what must be reported on the tax return, which is your federal 1040, which are wages and non-employee compensation, unemployment compensation, retirement plan distributions, cancellation of debt, hobby income. Those are just some examples of those. There are non-taxable income that does not need to be reported. Examples of those include public benefits, child support and alimony for certain divorces, gifts, and inheritances. I'll be talking now about 3 specific types of taxable income that I just wanted to highlight that tend to be issues that we see for low-income and mid-income taxpayers. So if they receive non-employee compensation, they receive a 1099 NEC, and that generally means that they're treated as an independent contractor and not as an employee, because otherwise they would have received a W-2. And if they are treated as an independent contractor, one of the things is that they wouldn't have had taxes withheld from their pay. And so they're responsible as independent contractors and those who are self-employed for paying those taxes. And they're also expected to make those quarterly estimated payments because there can be a penalty if you make a lump sum payment. So it's just important that people are aware of how they're classified. And if they are classified as an independent contractor, just being aware of what their obligations are going to be when they file their tax return, so that they might end up having a liability when they otherwise probably weren't anticipating it. Another area of taxable income I wanted to highlight is unemployment compensation. That's a 1099-G, and all unemployment compensation is taxable. A lot of taxpayers might not have chosen to withhold taxes from their unemployment. They might not have been aware of that. And so they can do a W-4B, which is being able to do voluntary withholding. They can make estimated tax payments, or they can have a higher withholding when they find new employment. And I'll talk more about withholding as well in a bit. And then I really wanted to highlight the one-time Minnesota rebate that was issued this past year to Minnesota residents in the amount of $260 per person. It was $520 for a couple married filing jointly, and then up to 3 dependents at $260 each. That would be up to $1,300 total. That is taxable on the federal level. The IRS made that decision. It will not be taxed by the Minnesota Department of Revenue, which can cause a little bit of confusion for people. Individuals should have received a 1099 miscellaneous if they did receive that Minnesota rebate. And then their tax liability will range anywhere from $26 to $286, depending on the amount received in their tax bracket. And so they need to report it on line 8 at their 1040 Schedule 1. It'd be 8Z as other income, and then on the Schedule 1, and then listed as other income on line 8 of the 1040. And then they need to subtract that amount from their federal adjusted gross income on line 33 of their Schedule M1M when they file their state tax return, and then also property tax. So I just wanted to highlight that because a lot of individuals aren't aware that it is taxable and that they need to report it. So they might have been a little confused when they received a 1099 miscellaneous or not sure what to do with it. So I just want to provide that information. Next, I'll be talking about filing statuses. There are 5 main filing statuses: single, head of household, married filing jointly, married filing separately, and qualifying survivor spouse. And so the filing status can determine certain deductions and credits that you're eligible for. And so for married filing jointly, it is determined by whether or not you're married by December 31st of the tax year. Something to note about married filing separately, it is an option for those who are married, but certain credits and deductions will not be available. And then if one spouse chooses to itemize, for example, then the other spouse would have to itemize their deductions. For the head of household, there is a specific test for that. And one needs to qualify for head of household specifically, otherwise they'd be filing as one of the other filing statuses. So you must be unmarried or considered unmarried by December 31st of the tax year, pay more than half of the cost for upkeep of a home, and then have a qualifying person live with them. And so I'll talk a little bit more about what considered unmarried means, because that can be a term that can be confusing for people. And so it needs that you need to file a separate tax return, that you paid more than half of the upkeep of your home, that you did not live with your spouse for the last 6 months of the tax year. And they do specifically look at the last 6 months of the tax year, that you did have a dependent that they specifically list as a child, stepchild, or foster child. So it's a specific relationship that's required, and that you must be able to claim that child as your dependent. And any temporary absences from the home for a spouse, for example, don't count for considered unmarried, and you are considered married for that tax year. So now I'll be talking about tax withholdings, which is a W-4 form. So previously, the number of allowances was tied to exemptions, but the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act changed that because we don't have federal exemptions through 2025. And so now it's based on your filing status, your income, itemized deductions or any other deductions that you take, and then your eligibility for dependent credits and related dependency credits. And so the goal of it was to actually simplify the process and make it more accurate. And so taxpayers do need to proactively update their withholdings. Employers don't have to provide a new W-4. An employee needs to ask for one if they're already employed when the change happened just a couple years ago to the W-4. And so, and those that have more than one job or have a working spouse, that kind of goes to that filing status as well. Then there's a worksheet that they can calculate exactly how much they're withholding. They can also have additional withholding withheld on the new W-4 as well. And so then I'll have a look here at what a W-4B looks like, and that's that voluntary withholding. And so for those that want to have taxes withheld from their Social Security benefits, because perhaps they receive an amount that is taxable, or from their unemployment compensation, they can do that W-4B and recommend that individuals do that to have the most accurate reflection of being able to kind of afford to pay any outstanding tax liability at tax filing time. And then there's also those estimated payment vouchers. And so if someone anticipates owing at least $1,000 in taxes after their deductions and credits, and their withholdings and credits are going to be less than the amount due, then they should make estimated payments. They are due quarterly, with it being in the June, September timeframe that I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation. And then you are expected to make those payments throughout the year at the end of the quarter. You can make one lump sum payment by tax filing day, so April 15th this year. There can be penalties assessed for not prepaying. There are also considerations where if someone was working with the IRS in order to resolve a debt, a lot of times you need to be current on your estimated payments or expectations for estimated payments. So it is really important to complete those quarterly if possible. Now I'll talk about ITINs, which are the individual tax identification numbers. So an individual needs a social security number or an ITIN number to file a tax return and claim dependents. So you need to apply or renew your ITIN using a Form W-7. And that does require a lot of identifying information and documentation to be submitted to the IRS. And so there are agencies that are certified acceptance agents like Prepare and Prosper that can look at a person's information, help them fill out the W-7 form, certify it, and then submit the form with a tax return to the IRS. Otherwise, an individual needs to send their original documentation to the IRS and wait to receive it back. But a lot of times it includes sending like your passport or their identification card with, and then the individual doesn't have that on their person. So people can be nervous about that. So going to a certified acceptance agent or a taxpayer assistance center can be really helpful with that. Um, the income tax returns are often used as proof of time living in the United States and can be required for immigration purposes, financial aid applications, loan applications, different things like that. So a lot of times it's helpful if a person doesn't have a social security number to get an ITIN so that they can file a tax return so that they have the proof. So that's just another reason that an individual might want to file even if they don't have a filing obligation. ITINs do expire. They expire after 3 years of non-use or on a scheduled basis based on the middle digit. You can find that information out on the IRS website. And something with the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act is that ITINs are no longer being issued or renewed for dependents or spouses that are not being claimed for a tax benefit. And so an individual needs to make sure that often comes into play if you're claiming a dependent or spouse outside of the United States. With the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, you're not able to do currently for minor dependents or spouses in applying for an ITIN for them. And so just wanting to be aware of that for clients. So now I'll be talking a little bit about the specific federal credits. And so there's a distinction between a deduction and a credit. So a tax deduction reduces the amount of income tax that a taxpayer will pay, resulting in a lower taxable income, whereas a credit reduces dollar for dollar the amount of tax a taxpayer owes. And then tax credits can be refundable or non-refundable, and I'll define those a little bit more as well. So a refundable credit can reduce the amount owed, and then any remaining amount is refunded back to the taxpayer. And so if, for example, the amount of the credit is $1,000 and the taxpayer has a liability of $800, then they would receive $200 refunded back to them in addition to eliminating that tax liability. Whereas a non-refundable tax credit can reduce the amount of taxes owed to zero, but you don't receive any of that remaining credit amount. And so that would mean, for example, that in my example, that the taxpayer would not receive that additional $200, their liability would be reduced to zero, and then that would kind of be the end of it, and you kind of forfeit in a way that additional $200. So the majority of dependent credits are refundable credits, but there are some that are non-refundable. So I do want to talk about, before I get into the credits, is we're mostly dependent-based credits because those are the ones that are focused especially for low-income and middle-income households. Claiming a dependent can have a distinct tax benefit for filing status. Like I talked about, being able to claim that head of household, you need to be able to have a dependent. You might qualify for certain deductions, which kind of can go along with filing status as well, and then credits. And so the term dependent is specifically defined by the IRS, and they can either be a qualifying child or a qualifying relative. Now, a qualifying child and qualifying relative are distinctly defined by the IRS. And for most credits and deductions, the dependent must be a qualifying child. And there are age requirements associated with age credit, and then a dependent can only be claimed by one taxpayer in a tax year. There is a specific exception just for the child tax credit, and then the related exemption, which doesn't exist right now on the federal level because of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, but that's an 8332 form. And that's when a custodial parent can sign away the right to claim the child for a tax year for purposes of the child tax credit, for example, but it cannot be signed away for the earned income tax credit. So I'll be talking about both of those credits. But I just want to highlight that for qualifying child and qualifying relative, relationship is a big part of the test for a qualifying dependent. And so for qualifying child, it does need to be your child or like a brother, a sister, or a descendant of those. Whereas a qualifying relative can be that same relationship or someone that lives with you for the entire tax year. But if you have a qualifying relative, then you're not going to be eligible for credits like the child tax credit and the earned income tax credit. Those must be qualifying child. And so you want to be prepared when claiming a dependent with the IRS to establish relationships, residencies, support, and priority for claiming that child for purposes of any credit. And so when you're establishing relationship, like kind of what I said, it depends on those certain type of defined relationship that the IRS considers. For residency, a lot of times if you're doing qualifying child, then it needs to be 6 months or more out of the year. And then priority goes to the parent who can claim. If both parents can claim and they're filing separately, then it would be the parent with the highest adjusted gross income. There are certain instances when, for example, a grandparent or an aunt or uncle might be able to claim a child as well. So just being aware of the priority and who has the highest adjusted gross income, for example. You want to make sure that your client or you yourself have specific documents to prove those prongs. Birth certificate, leases, school records, medical bills for children that are under school age. And then you'll want to know the adjusted gross income of any taxpayer who is eligible to claim the child. And then one specific thing to note is the documents need to be dated for the tax year that you are claiming the child. And so if you're looking at tax year 2023, which is what we're filing for right now, then any documentation would need to be dated for 2023. So you might receive a letter this month, from a doctor being like, I've seen this child, but it needs to specifically say, like, I've seen this child from January 2023 through December 2023, for example. And not just be dated February 2024, I've seen the child, and not reference specifically 2023, the IRS won't accept that. Improperly claiming a dependent can result in the loss of the right to claim certain credits in the future. You have to do a recertification form if that does happen. You might have to repay a refund. You might not receive a refund, or you're paying additional taxes and other penalties as well if you did receive a refund and need to pay it back because of improperly claiming a dependent. So it's important that taxpayers are aware of the rules concerning claiming dependents and who is eligible. A lot of times at the low-income taxpayer clinic, we have a lot of clients who just received misguided information or just thought, oh, well, I have the child in my care, I must be able to claim them as a dependent and claim them for these credits. But unless they meet those tests like relationship and residency and support, then they're not going to be eligible. And if they did receive any type of refund, the IRS has 3 years to go back and assess a taxpayer to review their record and see if what they claimed was appropriate or not and do an examination. And if the IRS finds that no, they weren't eligible, then they are responsible for paying back any refund they received, as well as penalties and interest. So just looking at that qualifying dependent, again, we're making sure that they meet any age or disability requirements specific for that tax credit, any income requirements that the taxpayer needs to meet, a relationship test that they lived with the taxpayer for more than 6 months out of the year, that they have a valid social security number for the child. There are instances when the taxpayer can have an ITIN and claim a child with a social security number, that the child was born during the tax year the credit is being claimed for, and that the child not provide more than half of their own support, which doesn't come up too often, the support issue, but it can if a child receives social security benefits, for example, they can be considered the child providing for their own support in that way. And so the parent would need to provide more than half of the child's total support overall for the year. So now I'm going to be talking about some specific federal tax credits. The earned income tax credit is a refundable federal tax credit for those taxpayers who work in 2023. So you must have earned income or self-employment income, unemployment compensation, social security, government benefits, child support, and alimony are not considered earned income. So they must have at least $1 of earned income during the tax year. The taxpayer must have a social security number. The qualifying children must have social security numbers. One thing to know is that with the earned income tax credit, you can qualify if you are claiming without a dependent. So you can be a low-income worker who does not have a dependent and still be able to claim the earned income tax credit for yourself. So it's important for clients to be aware of. The earned income tax credit is one of the largest unclaimed tax credits on federal tax returns. So just making sure clients are aware of it. And then you must be a US citizen or resident alien for the entire year and not be anyone else's qualifying child. There is usually, like I noted before, for filing status, there are certain credits that are not eligible if you do married filing separately. There is an exception for the earned income tax credit that started 2 years ago and has continued. You can do married but separated spouses who are filing separate returns can still claim the earned income tax credit. But in order to do that, they must live with their qualifying child for more than half of the year, and then either have the same, not have the same principal place of abode as the other spouse for at least 6 months out of the year, or be legally separated according to a written agreement. And this table just shows the EITC eligibility. So it's determined by the number of children and your filing status, and then the maximum amount of the credit. So the maximum amount of the credit for this tax year, if you do not have a child, is $600. For one child, it'd be a maximum of $3,995. 2 children, 6,604, and 3 or more children is 6,430. So for the child tax credit, that is designed to give an income boost to parents or guardians of children or other dependents if they specifically qualify. And so the child must have a social security number. The taxpayer can have a social security number or an ITIN. For age, the child must be 16 years old or younger. And these are the specific child tax credit rules for this tax filing season. They are specifically different than what we saw for 2021, which was an expansion of the child tax credit where we saw some advance payments. We also saw there not being an income requirement. We saw an increased amount overall, but they have reverted back for now. Currently, the taxpayer must have at least $2,500 in earned income. And there is a refundable and non-refundable component of the child tax credit. So it's up to $2,000 is non-refundable, and then up to $1,600 per qualifying child for the additional tax credit, which is refundable. There are looking at some current legislation on the federal level for the child tax credit that could potentially go into effect still for this tax filing season. And that would make it so the amount is $1,800 for this year for the refundable portion of it. Then it would be $1,900 for 2024 and then $2,000 for 2025. That is still pending though. There is nothing has been officially passed. And so currently as it stands, the credit is up to the $1,600 for the refundable portion. So if you have a taxpayer with a non-child qualifying dependents, then you may qualify for the credit for other dependents, which is the $500 non-refundable credit. So that might specifically look like we had a recent case with our tax clinic where a taxpayer might be claiming a partner that they're not married to children. And so if a taxpayer does that, then the taxpayer wouldn't be meeting necessarily that relationship test for qualifying child, but the children would still qualify as a qualifying dependent, as a qualifying relative. And so that taxpayer would be eligible for a $500 non-refundable credit per dependent that they would be claiming. And so, or if you have a child that is, for example, a dependent, but is above 16, for example, for like the child tax credit, there is still that $500 non-refundable credit. Or if you have an individual who is totally disabled, or you might have a parent that you're claiming as a dependent, they would be a non-child qualifying dependent, and then again, be able to claim that $500 non-refundable credit. So next I'll talk about the child and dependent care credit. So this one is both a federal and a Minnesota state non-refundable tax credit. So we'll be talking again about the Minnesota tax credit specifically next Thursday, but I did want to talk about this one, and this one has both the federal and state information on it because it is both. So the credit is for paying someone while working or looking for work to care for a qualifying child under 13 or a disabled spouse or disabled dependent that lived with a taxpayer. So you must have earned income in 2023, must have paid someone to care for the dependent and that individual must not be an immediate family member in the household, and they can also not be a sibling of the dependent themselves. The dependent lived with you for more than half of the year. The dependent can have a social security number or an ITIN. And then for the Minnesota level of the credit, there are household income maximums. So you can claim a credit for up to 35% of the qualified care expenses. And so the maximum amount of expenses would be $3,000 for one dependent, two or more, $6,000. So the maximum credit is $1,050 for one dependent or $2,100 for two or more. And again, those are non-refundable tax credits. So when you're looking at qualified expenses, it can be for any center-based childcare, babysitting care, summer camp, or care provided by adult relatives outside of that tax household. Again, you must have the care provider's name, address, and then their tax identification number, be that their social security number or business identification number. You have to provide that to the IRS. And so that can be complicated for certain situations. Someone might pay an adult relative to care for a child. So the expectation then is if they try to claim the child independent care credit and provide that care provider's information, then the IRS is expecting that care provider to include that as income that they received. So taxpayer, might have an arrangement, but the arrangement isn't that formalized, or doesn't want to put the relative, for example, in a situation where they have to pay taxes on the money that they're receiving, even though they should be reporting it, depending on the amount that they receive as taxable income. And so just a consideration for taxpayers to know that they do have to have the information if they want to claim the credit. And then if they are married, they must file married filing jointly. So this is an example of a credit that is not available if you filed married filing separately. So now, the last two credits I'll be talking about are education-based federal tax credits. So there's the American Opportunity Credit, which helps make post-secondary education more affordable for the taxpayer's spouse, or dependents. The maximum amount of the credit is $2,500 per student, up to 40% or $1,000 of which is refundable. There are adjusted gross income maximums for being able to claim that credit. Qualifying expenses include tuition, enrollment fees, required course materials. The individual taxpayer will receive a 1098-T from the education institution. There are specific requirements in order to claim the American Opportunity Credit, and you can only claim it for up to 4 years. So the taxpayer's spouse or dependent must be pursuing a degree or recognized educational credential, enrolled at least half-time for at least one academic period, that should say for 2023, not have completed the first 4 years of post-secondary education at the beginning of the tax year, not be convicted of a felony drug offense, not claim the credit already 4 times, and then you can have a social security number or an ITIN. The lifelong learning credit is often a great credit that's available if you don't qualify for the American Opportunity Learning Credit. So the lifelong learning credit is a non-refundable federal tax credit with a maximum amount of $2,000 per tax return. It has the same adjusted gross income maximums in place. You don't have that same requirement that you be pursuing a degree or credential, and the federal drug conviction rule does not apply. There's also no limit on the number of years that it can be claimed, because again, it's a non-refundable credit. So that's key differences between the two. Qualifying expenses include tuition and fees, and then education materials specifically purchased from the post-secondary institution. That is a requirement there. So now I'll kind of be ending with some post-tax return filing considerations and then some resources. So one thing to consider is, does the taxpayer owe any federal or state tax agencies, or any like federal or state agencies in general, back child support, court fees, certain driving offenses, student loans, different things like that. They'll want to watch out for refund offsets and revenue recapture. And then if that happens, the taxpayer receive a notice from either the IRS, if the IRS did that, then they would receive a notice saying, hey, we've taken a refund and applied it to another liability or debt. And if they owe taxes to the IRS, then it'll say, which tax year, the amount that was applied, and what the current balance remaining is. Or if it's to another federal agency, it'll be from the Treasury Offset Program, TOP, and they will send a notice saying the amount in the institution. A lot of people get confused, and when that happens, they contact they contact the IRS, for example, because it was their federal tax refund that was taken, but you actually need to talk to the specific agency that received the funds and not the IRS. Another thing to look at is, does the client have their sufficient documents to support their filing status, credits, deductions in case they were audited? Because again, the IRS has 3 years to audit and examine a tax return. So the taxpayer will want to keep all their documentation for at least 3 years. I often advise my clients to keep documentation for longer, just in case the IRS does audit and maybe their address has changed or they didn't receive the notices. And then we're looking at a tax year that might be 6 years old and trying to gather information after the fact. And then did that client just become aware that they're eligible for a credit deduction? For example, like the recovery rebate credit, or if they didn't realize, oh, I could have claimed that child tax credit in 2021, for example, they can file an original or amended return within the 3-year time period to claim a credit. And then if the client recently moved, they might not receive their refund if they were going to get a paper check. Or just making sure that if they're audited, they receive notices from the IRS. So you can update your address on your next tax return. You can also call the IRS and you can do a write to the IRS and include your information. You can use IRS Form 8822 as well. And those usually take at least 45 days to be processed by the IRS. So there can be some lap over time if someone's receiving a notice, for example, and the IRS hasn't updated their address yet. But it's always good to have your current address on file with the IRS because you never know when an issue might arise. And so again, a client might be wondering, hey, I filed my taxes, I did direct deposit, I was supposed to get my deposit within 21 days approximately. I haven't received it. It's been a month. Like, what's going on? The client could have unfiled or missed tax returns for prior tax years. A check could have been held or returned due to a problem with name or address. You can elect to have your refund applied to an estimated tax liability. So they might have inadvertently done that, for example, or not been aware that their tax preparer had done that. The IRS could be reviewing their tax return. The IRS does do that during tax filing season, especially to those who are claiming those dependent credits. And so that's another reason why there is that delay until February 27th for those refunds to start being issued. So a client might have filed right away thinking they're going to get their refund soon, but they needed to wait till at least February 27th for that refund to be issued. And then, like I mentioned, there could be the refund offset or revenue recapture. There is a mechanism. If, for example, your client filed their tax return, really need the refund. They're experiencing extreme hardship and extreme financial hardship. Examples that the IRS considers are having utilities shut off, being evicted from housing, different situations like that, that really go to that extreme financial hardship prong. Then you can apply for an offset bypass refund in the with the IRS if it's specifically the IRS and it's going to be applied to an IRS debt. Then you can contact the Taxpayer Advocate Service and have their information. One of the last slides is a resource. And they can put in an offset bypass refund request. Now that request needs to be done in time with the filing of the tax return. And so it can't be one of those things where you wait, don't receive it, and then try to file for an offset bypass refund. That might not be possible. It might be too late. So it's just things to consider right now, and be aware that if a client does have a federal tax liability in general, their refund will be taken and offset with it. And it's only if they have the extreme financial hardship and specifically ask for a bypass refund that they will potentially receive their refund back. And you actually receive the amount up to your hardship. So for example, If your refund was $1,000 and the amount of your hardship is $500, then they would refund you the $500, but keep the other 500 and apply it to your tax liability that you have. And that can only be done with federal tax debts, with the IRS for an offset bypass refund. You can't do it if you owe a different agency, because the IRS only has control over its own computer system and refund process that way. Now, I'll talk a little bit now about the resources. There is assistance for low to middle income taxpayers with audits, collections, other issues kind of related to taxes. And there are the 2 low income taxpayer clinics that we are funded by the IRS specifically through grants in order to help taxpayers with disputes with the IRS. And so I have the intake lines listed for Mid-Minnesota Legal Aid, which is the organization I'm with, which is 612-334-5970. There's also the University of Minnesota Tax Law Clinic that has a low-income taxpayer clinic as well. Their intake line is 612-625-5515. And then the Volunteer Lawyers Network provides limited assistance, especially we deal with the IRS side of things mainly in the low-income taxpayer clinics. If a client were to have a state-only tax issue, for example, or when the LATCs was not available, the Volunteer Lawyers Network is sometimes available to take limited cases. And their intake line is 612-752-6677. Something to know when you're getting the legal assistance here is there is no assistance with tax preparation or filing, which we'll talk more about next Thursday, how people can find assistance with that specifically. And then here, so you can like screenshot it now or save it for later when you receive the slides, is different resources on a federal and state level for getting assistance. On the federal level, there's that taxpayer advocate service. So I have a link to their website and their phone number, and those taxpayer assistance centers that are located, again, 5 of them in Minnesota throughout the state, 2 of which are in the metro area in St. Paul and Bloomington. On the state level, we'll talk more about this as well next Thursday, but there is the taxpayer rights advocate, which is available to assist taxpayers with state tax issues and making sure that there's a fair process for the administration of tax in Minnesota. Finding a free tax preparer, the volunteer income tax assistance and TCE sites. So that is listed. And then there is some general information and referrals available. United Way 211 is a great resource. And then also Law Help MN and MMLA helps prepare guides that are available in different languages that are in easy to read language specifically for taxpayers. And we have the help sheets that are on like each of the credits I've gone over, for example, specific information about different issues that low income taxpayers face are available on that website. So I highly recommend that like you and clients review those as well. So I have my contact information right here. If you want to reach out to me specifically, if you have any questions, you can give me an email and provide that information. And then again, the intake number for MMLA if you have a client that you want to refer to us. So I can take any questions.
Thanks, Aisha. Now you can take a breath. So informative. We do not have any questions in the chat that I saw, but if folks want to unmute and ask a question, please do, or you can put it in the chat. We'll give you a few minutes to do that. But I did want to point out that I did put the evaluation in the chat. If you could take just a few minutes to fill that out, that will really help us be more intentional in the information that we share in the future. Okay, I am not seeing any questions, nor am I hearing any questions. Oh, could you please go back to the last page for the last slide, Aisha, for the contact? Thank you. Okay, if we'll stay on for a few minutes, but if there are no questions, excuse me, we thank you all for attending. Like we shared these slides and the recording will be sent out, so you'll have all all that information. And you have our contact information if you want to ask specific questions. And if you are signed up, or we would love if you did sign up for next week's webinar as well, and we'll continue the conversation and share some more important resources for this tax season. So thank you so much for joining us, and have a wonderful day. We will send out the recording for both webinars and slide decks for both webinars in our emails. So you'll get both if you can attend next week.